If you're looking to buy a new MacBook, you're probably considering one of two options. The first option you're probably considering is the entry-level MacBook in the lineup, the MacBook Air. And this is a great choice. It comes with a powerful M2 chip, it has a thin and lightweight design, and it gets all-day battery life, and it comes in at a good price point. It's $1,099. But you might actually also be considering a MacBook Pro. Now you might be wondering, why would I be considering a Pro laptop? Well, that's because Apple recently introduced a new M3 base model and they dropped the price significantly by $400, bringing this down to a $1,600 starting price point. And on top of that, if you actually start to configure this M2 MacBook Air similarly to this new M3 MacBook Pro, you'll find that there's actually only a $200 price difference between this laptop. And if you were considering that bigger 15-inch MacBook Air because you want a bigger screen, well, then that's only $100 away from this new 14-inch M3 MacBook Pro. And this MacBook Pro has a lot of good things going for it. So in this video, I want to compare the MacBook Air to the MacBook Pro and kind of find out which one you should pick up as a consumer, because there's a right answer for some people and a wrong answer for others. And that's the best intro you're ever going to see on this channel. Okay, the first and probably biggest thing to consider is price. So the M2 MacBook Air starts at $1,099, while the M3 MacBook Pro starts at $1,599. But like I mentioned in the intro, that's for the base level model on the Air, which comes with a lower binned M2 chip and only 256 gigabytes of memory. The M3 Pro not only comes with the most recent M3 chip, but it also comes with 512 gigabytes of SSD storage as standard. So if we spec up the Air to the full M2 chip and 512 gigabytes of internal storage, you're looking at $1,399 for a similarly spec'd laptop. And there's also the 15-inch MacBook Air, which by default does come with the full 10 GPU core M2 for $1,299. But again, if you upgrade it to 512 gigabytes of storage, it comes in at $1,499, only $100 away from this M3 MacBook Pro. Now, while I won't say that everyone needs to upgrade to 512 gigabytes of storage or even get the full M2 chip, I actually think for the Air you can kind of skip that upgrade, right? But what I will say is that most people would benefit from upgrading to 512 gigabytes of storage on the Air because 256 gigabytes is a very low amount of storage and it can fill up very quickly. Also, don't forget the MacBook Air with 256 gigabytes of storage also comes with a slower internal solid-state drive, while the 512 gigabyte MacBook Pro, and if you make that upgrade to the MacBook Air, will then get 3,000 read and write speeds, so they get faster SSDs as well if you upgrade them. But no matter how you spec out the Air, it's always going to be cheaper than the M3 MacBook Pro. And yeah, budget is probably the biggest consideration you're going to make when buying a laptop, so it obviously is very important. But there's other factors too that might change those decisions, and one of those might be design. Now, the M2 MacBook Air and M3 MacBook Pro actually have very similar designs nowadays. Back, when the MacBook Air first came out and the old MacBook Pros were out, the designs used to be so different. But yeah, basically they both have like a flat-sided design with smaller bezels around the display, and they even have a notch now. And both MacBooks have a great trackpad, a good keyboard that is comfortable to type on for long typing sessions, and both laptops are very portable. Obviously, the 14-inch MacBook Pro is slightly bigger than the MacBook Air, but if you put the MacBook Air on top of the MacBook Pro, they take up a similar amount of desk space. Now, the one thing that the Air does have going for it is that it is considerably thinner than the M3 MacBook Pro, and it's also lighter in weight. It weighs 2.7 pounds compared to the entry-level M3 MacBook Pro, which weighs 3.4 pounds. And that might not sound like much, but when I was handling both of these MacBooks side by side, the Air does get a slight edge here with comfort because it is lighter. It does feel more comfortable to hold with its thinner profile, and I guess that kind of just, is the point of the MacBook Air. It's supposed to be thin and light, and even though the MacBook Pro and MacBook Air designs are closer than ever, you still get that kind of feeling with the MacBook Air, whereas the MacBook Pro, you can feel the extra thickness. Now, one thing you might have noticed as I was handling these MacBooks is that there's more ports on the MacBook Pro. The MacBook Air only has 2 Thunderbolt USB-C ports and a MagSafe charging port, and also the headphone jack that's still there, while the M3 MacBook Pro gets all of those ports, plus the addition of an SD card slot for importing photos and videos, and an HDMI port for easily connecting to other displays. So yes, while the Air is thinner and lighter, you do miss out on having those additional port options, and as someone that uses an SD card quite frequently, I like having it on a laptop. So having that on the MacBook Pro is a big win for me, and occasionally when I do need to hook it up to an HDMI port, which honestly for me is pretty rare nowadays, it is nice to have on the MacBook. But to be fair, if you have a MacBook Air, you can get something like a USB-C adapter like I have over here, and that connects up into one of the ports, and then basically you get like a ton more ports, right? This one has an SD card slot, 2 USB-A ports, and an HDMI port, and also a micro SD card slot. So if you do need to get more ports on the Air, you can buy something like this. They're pretty inexpensive. A big deciding factor when you're going to buy one of these laptops is the display. Now, don't get me wrong, both displays are good, and the MacBook Air has a 13.6-inch display with 224 pixels per inch, and it can get up to 500 nits of brightness. It's a good color accurate LCD display, and when I use it, I really like it. But the MacBook Pro, it just takes that display to the next level. It has a bigger 14.2-inch display with a resolution of 3024 by 1964, and it's even more pixel dense at 254 pixels per inch. And for SDR content, it can get 100 nits brighter than the MacBook Air at 600 nits of brightness. Furthermore, it has a mini LED display with 10,000 small LED lights that can be turned on and off for more precise brightness and contrast, letting the MacBook Pro get up to 1600 nits of peak brightness when watching HDR content, or 1000 nits of full screen brightness watching HDR content. So if you watch HDR content on your MacBook Pro, it's a big upgrade. On top of that, the MacBook Pro also uses a 120Hz ProMotion display. This means that the MacBook Pro has double the refresh rate of the MacBook Air, and it just makes the Mac look so much smoother. So if you play games on your Mac that can take advantage of 120 frames per second, you can get some really smooth looking gameplay, and then just every other interaction that you have on this Mac, like moving the mouse cursor around, scrolling on websites, seeing the animations in macOS, everything just looks so much smoother with 120 Hz, and it's a big display upgrade. Seriously, the MacBook Pro has one of the best displays that I have personally ever used, and it's definitely the best all-around laptop display that I have ever seen. And out of all the exclusive features that the MacBook Pro has, I really think this is the main reason to consider upgrading to one. Now, it's not only about the display, right? The MacBook Pro also packs in better speakers than the MacBook Air. They have more clarity, deeper bass, and just more full sound than, the thinner MacBook Air, which has, relatively thin sounding speakers in comparison. But don't take my word for it, hear it for yourself. Oh, Greg's Gadgets here, and I'm bringing you the sick beats the only way I know how to, during a laptop comparison. And besides display and speaker, I also gotta hand it to the MacBook Pro for having the longest battery life rating ever on a MacBook, with its 22-hour battery life rating, which is 4 more hours than the official Apple rating of the MacBook Air, which comes in at 18 hours. But honestly, in real-world usage, both laptops have fantastic battery life, especially if you've never used an Apple Silicon MacBook, right? Like if you're on an Intel MacBook and you're upgrading to one of these laptops, either one, you're going to be blown away by the battery life gains. All right, now what about performance? Listen, I don't think I need to go over this in huge detail because the M3 MacBook Pro has a newer generation chip in it, and it is going to win every benchmark. The CPU in benchmarks is around 18% faster in single-core performance and 22% faster in multi-core performance, which granted, it is very impressive to see those gains year over year. The GPU gains on the M3 chip seem to be a little less impressive, actually. I did a GFX benchmark, which is a metal-optimized benchmark, and it was only around a 7% improvement from the M2 chip. So for you benchmark freaks out there, if you want to see the scores, here they are. You got Geekbench, you got GFX Bench, you got Greg Bench, okay? The M3, it's obviously going to win every category every single time. However, in real-world performance, there's not too much of a difference between the M3 and M2 for most users. I'm going to preface that, like most users. Like, yes, if you're like a superpower user, you can probably notice a difference with the M3, but Most people aren't going to notice a difference. So yeah, if you do like side-by-side app loading on the M3 chip, it is quicker, but it's not like a huge speed difference either. It's not like the M2 MacBook Air is taking like 30 seconds to open an app. Like you click on it, usually bounces and then it opens. Then when you're using apps, they feel just as responsive and fluid on the M2 MacBook Air as they do on the M3 MacBook Pro. If anything, again, that 120 Hz ProMotion display is doing more work making the apps appear smoother than any of the additional performance offered by the M3. And the M2 and M3 are both so well optimized for certain tasks at this point that sometimes it's kind of hard to really see a speed advantage. For example, I did a 4K 10-minute video export to H.264 in Final Cut Pro on the M2 MacBook Air and on the M3 MacBook Pro. And for most of the export, they were neck and neck. Like I didn't really see any performance advantage on the M3 MacBook Pro. But by the time it was done exporting, the M3 MacBook Pro was faster. It was 7 seconds faster than the MacBook Air, right? So yeah, exporting a 10-minute 4K video clip to H.264, it's not the most intensive task, right? Like I might actually need to up the intensity on these benchmarks because recent Apple Silicon Macs are just so good at video editing. But I also think tests like this are more indicative of, you know, what entry-level users might do, right? You're really not editing a Hollywood film on a MacBook Air. You may edit an occasional home video or upload a video to YouTube, and both machines are capable of doing that. Both machines have really good performance. I really want to stress that. Now, don't get me wrong, right? Like we ran a test that I guess, you know, the M2 and M3 chip both have like these media engines that are very optimized for video editing workflows. And, you know, they both did like the export in around like 6 minutes. So that's not that long, right? Like if you had like a longer video edit or just a longer workload, there is a fan in the MacBook Pro. So that is going to lead to less thermal throttling than on the MacBook Air. And that extra CPU and GPU headroom are going to be helpful for more demanding tasks. But if you're someone that doesn't have to worry about that kind of professional level performance, I just kind of wanted to show you how good the previous version of Apple Silicon still is for day-to-day performance. And that's kind of my point. For most users, I don't think performance is going to be the deciding factor, which might surprise you considering one of these laptops is literally labeled Pro. It's labeled as a Pro level machine, and I'm telling you, I don't think performance is the deciding factor between both of these laptops. I think the areas where you should decide to upgrade to this are things like the better display, the better speakers, more ports, the better battery life, and yes, that little extra reassurance that you have the latest M3 chip. If it was me deciding between a $1,400 configuration of the MacBook Air and this $1,600 MacBook Pro, well, I would end up paying the extra $200 for these hardware benefits. That's just how I would do it, right? Like that is my advice. But yeah, if you're someone that doesn't have $1,600 to throw around and you're more in line with picking out one of the budget spec MacBook Airs, this still is hands down the best laptop you're going to get for $1,099. And because the M2 has been on the shelf longer than the M3, it's also an easier laptop to find deals on. As I'm making this video right now, I found the Air on Best Buy's website for $949. It's a fantastic price for this laptop. So yeah, there's no clear winner or loser, but there are differences that could have you picking one over the other. So now it's your turn. What would you pick? Would you pick this MacBook Air or this M3 MacBook Pro? Let me know in the comments below. What do you think is the better laptop for most users? And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to give me a like. If you want to see more, well, make sure you get subscribed. That's how you get more videos in your feed from me, if you want that. I don't know who would want that, but if you want that, you should do that. And hey, if you do that, do. I'll catch you in the next one.